So, Colin, I wanted to start off today by telling you about one of my favorite experiments in academic marketing.
Okay. Is
That's
that
by,
like how to eat Cocoa Pops without getting all of the chocolate dribbled down you?
that is exactly what it is. Yeah. We spent a lot of time in the academy working on what we call the dribble problem with cereal eating. Yeah, it's a big issue.
Yeah. And it's particularly when it's Cocoa Pops because it's
No,
all
exactly.
chocolatey and it just gets
Yeah,
everywhere, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's all we got for you this week. I don't know how we recover from that.
Yeah, I didn't
Talk
expect
for
to go
another
there
20
anyway.
minutes. Um, no, it's not a study about eating cereal, chocolatey cereal, Colin. We can talk about
Right.
that next week. No, this is it was conducted by a guy named Itamar Simonson, who's a professor at Stanford, and it was a very, very clever experiment. So what he
Right.
did is he took classrooms full of students. So I think he was teaching two different classrooms, and he was going to give them snacks for class. So
Okay.
one group for 3 weeks, every week at the beginning of class, he would say, "Okay, what snack do you want?" And he had a selection of, I don't know, 4 or 5 different snacks,
Yeah.
M&Ms and crisps. See how I translated that into British for you?
Thank you very much.
You're
As
welcome.
opposed to chips,
As
which are
opposed to chips, yeah, which are
yeah.
something different. But you get the idea. A couple
Yeah.
of snacks. And so people would write down their choice, and then they'd get their snack option. The other classroom, he said, "Hey, I'm going to give you guys snacks for the next 3 weeks. But in order to know what to buy, you need to make all of your selections now so that I can
Sure.
make sure to buy for subsequent weeks." So they made their 3 choices, and then they got their first week's choice immediately. And then the next week, they got what they'd chosen at time one. And then the third
Sure.
week, they again got what they'd chosen at time one. And so what he was interested in looking across these two conditions was how much variety people had in their selections. And what he
Okay.
found was there was significantly more variety for the people who made the choice at time one for the next 3 weeks than there was for the people who made 3 separate decisions, each for an immediate snack. So, in
Right.
other words, if you were in one of these conditions and I said, "What do you want for the next 3 weeks?" You would say, "Well, today I'm going to have M&Ms, but next week I'll have Cheez-Its,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then the
So
week three
more
I'll have..."
variety the longer out you're looking.
Exactly. Whereas if I asked you every week, you go, "I'll have M&Ms today," and then next
Yes.
week you'd say, "You know what? I'm going to have M&Ms again," and the
Yes.
next week you'd say, "You know what? I'm going to have M&Ms again."
Yes.
So what he found was that people who are making what's called an intertemporal choice, so in other words, a choice for some point in the future, a choice across time,
Yeah.
they had different preferences than people who were making a series of immediate choices over time.
And I love the fact that it's called I can't even say it. Whatever it is that you said,
Intertemporal.
intertemporal.
Yes.
Can't even say the bloody thing. Intertemporal choices, because that's again just such a wonderful marketing phrase, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yeah,
it sort of trips off the tongue, don't you think?
exactly. Yeah, no, a lot of what we do is gatekeep. And if we choose terms that normal people can't even
Yeah,
say, then that
absolutely.
clearly marks us off as being super smart PhDs.
Well, we've made some progress, mate, because you've actually gave me a backhanded comment there by saying that I was a normal person.
Yeah,
So,
no, I meant it in a bad way. But
but to be serious for a moment, I think that I mean it's totally right. We do we order some ready meals,
yeah,
um,
that's another
a
great
thing
example.
called All Plants.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's all vegetarian, etc. But they come frozen. Okay, and we get this list of things and we order it every month. And every month we've still got the same things left at the
yeah,
end of the month because we've gone. I particularly like their vegetarian lasagna or their vegetarian shepherd's pie, and I go, yeah, I'll have one. And and then by the end of the month, we've still got some of the noodles left because I didn't really want those in the first place, but I thought I would because it would mix it up a bit. But
yeah.
actually, the reality is I have the same bloody thing
I
all
love
the
that
time.
you've actually experienced what this hypothetical
Yes.
experiment was. Yeah, no, you've just described most people's pantry, where
Yes.
it's full of stuff that you bought back in like 2006, where you're like, oh, that'd
Yes.
be fun to make someday. Like, I'll do that. And
Yes.
then we're just never in the mood, and we tend to eat a lot of the very similar things. Another example that I love was back in the day when Netflix was still sending out physical DVDs.
Yeah.
You would need to do a similar process where you'd go on their website and you'd create a movie queue. It's like, oh, I'd
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
watch this and I'd like to watch this. And then when you sent one in, they'd send one back. I was on a program where we could have two movies simultaneously. And so they'd send me two, and then I'd send one back after I watched it, and then they'd send me one to replace it. There were a couple of times where um, I was sending back one movie over and over again, and the second movie just sat on top of my TV for weeks. Because and usually it was like an aspirational movie, like, oh, this is a heady documentary about something, or this is like a highbrow drama about
Sure.
World War I. Like,
Yes.
I'll want to watch that. And I
Yes.
was never in the mood for it. So I had this same intertemporal choice phenomenon where at the
But you see,
time I was like, this is something I should watch. And then it would come
yes.
around and I just never.
And I'm glad you said that, because this feels like it's a bit of a cathartic experience now. Because in my Netflix My List
Yeah.
channels, I have loads of films that I've bookmarked to watch, and they've been there for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, no, that actually would be good for me to watch that,
Yes, I should do that.
but I never get round
It
to
happens
do
with
it.
books too all the time, where people will buy a book going, oh, this is a really, I should read this. This would be good.
Yeah.
And then it'll just sit on your shelf or on your book stand for, months and you never get around to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, as I was doing my due diligence looking into this, there was also. Do you want to tell people about the marshmallow test as well?
Sure. So this one has gotten pretty famous. Um, in the early versions of it, they've run a number of different versions of this over time, but the early versions of it, they'd take young kids, so 3, 4, 5 years old, and the experimenter, usually in the guise of a teacher, would say, "Okay, so here's a marshmallow, and I'm going to leave this here, and I'm going to leave the room. Now, don't eat it, right? I'm going to come back, and if when I come back, you haven't eaten it, then I'll give you two marshmallows. So
Yeah.
you can't eat it." And so, what happens a lot of times is the kid will break down and eat the marshmallow because they have this like immediacy bias where they can't
Sure.
see far enough in the future. As a quick aside, when I was a graduate student, uh, through the hospital system where my daughter was born, the psychologists who worked at my university contacted us, not because I was a grad student, but because we'd had a child. And they said, we work in this developmental psychology lab. Would you mind if we ran some experiments on your kid? And I was like, well, yeah, that's great. So we brought her in, and it's really great. They were super kind, and it was essentially just our daughter playing games. She ended up loving it. It was fun. But they ran the marshmallow test on her.
All
And
right.
so I got to see that behind a one-way mirror where they
Right.
said, okay, so here's this thing. Their version was they gave her kind of a wrapped gift. And they're like, okay, there's something really exciting in here.
Sure.
She can't open it yet. And then they left the room and started the timer to see how long it would be until she would open the gift. And my
Sure.
wife and I were on the other side of the glass, and we were like, you might as well go back in the room. She's never going to open that thing. Like she's the most conscientious child. And they're like, no, usually it takes a couple of minutes. And we're like, all right, we'll wait. And finally the clock ran out, and then they just went back in because she never, like, you told her not to open it, so she's not going to open it. But
Very
yeah, so
good.
that's another version of this kind of intertemporal choice. Do you want something lesser but more immediate, or something more longer term that might have a larger overall benefit from you?
Yeah. So that was what it started making me think around, which was the. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it's instant gratification versus long term benefits, or.
Yes.
But as I started to think about it, one of my first ever jobs back in the day was I used to work for Mars Confectionery, Mars
Yeah.
Candy. Yeah.
Yep.
And my job was as a salesperson going around to these small outlets. And the idea was that you were trying to increase the range of the Mars candy bars, etc. Yeah, that these small outlets would have. And one of the stats that always sticks in my mind is that 70%, and this was a few years ago, and that's all I'm going to say, 70% of confectionery sales were based on impulse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is obviously the reason why they have them by the checkout and all that type of stuff. But I guess the point is, it's that exact thing, isn't it? Is I'm having this instant gratification of buying it. The fact that I know that I shouldn't buy it, and it's going to cause not one bar, but if I do this all the time, it's going to cause me problems for weight and health and everything else in the distance. Is an irrelevance, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's all these interesting intertemporal choice phenomena where we do things now that we regret later, or that we make different choices now than we would make later if we were in a different spot. Um, and one of the things that ties all these things through together is, interestingly enough, our sense of self, like kind of how we define ourselves. And so one of the interesting phenomena that's been identified is the fact that when we think of ourselves as people, think of ourselves as ourselves, we tend to think of ourselves as a different person in the future or in the past as we
Right.
are now. And so
Okay.
when I'm making a decision to whether to cheat on my diet or not, I know that the benefits of that decision are going to accrue to like future Ryan.
Yeah.
And I think of future Ryan as kind of being a different person than
Sure.
present Ryan.
That's
Um,
interesting, actually, because doesn't
yeah.
that go back to the Netflix library?
Yes.
So if I think of my Netflix library or my list, I've got a number of films on there that are to do with documentaries about animals,
Yeah.
which I sometimes enjoy, but it probably says that I like to think of myself as probably enjoying those things than I actually do.
Yes.
I'm actually more into Star Wars and science fiction than doing something that's educational, that's good for me. But I like to think that I'm that person that, yeah,
Yes. So one of the
interesting.
ways we think about our future selves is through a very aspirational lens, right?
Yeah,
Like, I'm not in the mood for a documentary right now, but future me will be much
yeah,
more interested in improving himself. It's the same reason
yeah,
we cheat on our diets, right? It's not that we've decided we're no longer interested in losing weight,
yeah,
and so that we don't need to worry about it anymore. It's that future Ryan is going to be much more diligent. Right?
sure.
Future Ryan, I can rely on to exercise more to make up for this and
Yes,
to stick to the diet, so this won't be a big deal.
yeah. So, what are the implications then for from a customer experience perspective? I guess that if you go back to the first example, is that offering people choice, you probably have to offer people. So, take a step back and just sort of summarize what you said at the beginning, which is if you offer people some choice at the beginning, they tend to choose the same thing over, you know, what do you want out of this list? You tend to choose the same thing day after day. And when I think about it again, I don't know about you, but I have the same breakfast every day.
Yeah.
I very rarely change the breakfast that I have. When I think about my shopping, okay, then we tend to have the same food every day, and that's not a complaint to as my wife who does most of the cooking, but the we tend to have the same type of food all the time as well, or each week, put it that way, not
Yeah.
necessarily every day. Um, but but you've got to offer. So I could argue on one side of it with that in mind. I should just turn around and not even give you a choice, just tell you that these are the ones that you ordered yesterday, all of these. But that would feel too limiting.
Yep. People
Uh,
like
so
choice.
I like a choice, but actually, when given a choice, I'm only going to, or what I actually do is only buy the short, the smaller amount, or the same thing, should I say? But actually, if you spread the choice over too long, then the danger is that people are going to end up ordering things that they don't ever use.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, in terms of the practical implications of this or understanding how this will affect people, recognize that the distance between choice and consumption is going to affect that consumption and how people evaluate it. So, if I'm having you make a bunch of immediate choices versus if I'm having you make longer term choices, we can expect you to behave differently. So, on average, if we're having you make choices for the future, we can expect you'll be more variety seeking
Sure.
in terms of how you make those choices. And that has important implications. So, you can see these frozen noodles stack up in your freezer up to a point, and then you'll just decide it's time to cancel the service because clearly you're not
Yeah.
using it in the way that it needs to be used, or it's a waste
Yeah.
of money or whatever. So, you can accommodate that variety seeking up front, but recognize that that could have longer term negative consequences for you. Another implication is that you can anticipate that people, like if this is more of an aspirational purchase, something that's kind of good for me, then is there a way to get people to make that well in advance? Because they'll be more in a frame of mind to do that. If this is not an aspirational purchase, if it is more about kind of immediate gains, then those types of decisions will be best made immediately, right? This is
Sure.
this is our impulse buy.
Sure. So here's one that I've often thought about, and I'd be interested to gain your opinion on. Um, do you remember up until a few years ago when you used to fly, you used to get that magazine Sky
Yeah,
Mall,
Sky Mall. Yeah,
yeah, which I'm sure the listener will remember, but it was basically like a list of a
stuff
catalogue
you
of,
don't need is what
yeah,
the
stuff you
Sky
don't
Mall.
need. But I always found it really interesting because
Yes,
I used to pick it up and think, oh, this looks good.
yes,
And I used to look through all of these things, but it was the classic stuff of you'd buy something and then you'd never bloody use it,
yep,
or it never worked in the way that you thought it was going to, or you never did as much as you. And recently, the same applies with. I found myself looking at some of the lightning offers on Prime,
yeah,
Amazon Prime, yeah, and last time it was on, I can't remember what it was. There was a couple of things I bought. One of which was to cover the back seat of my car because I've sometimes look after a dog, as
yep,
you would have heard, um, and but I've never used the bloody thing. So there's something. Therefore, there must be that must be applying to sort of the instant gratification part of I'm buying something, but not thinking about the long term
yeah.
benefits.
So I did a research project with at the time she was a PhD student, where we looked at people's use of wish lists and
Right.
using shopping baskets as kind of temporary holding places for items. And what was interesting is that people tended to kind of segregate out the benefits and the costs. And
Right.
so uh, when you buy something like that, you kind of are considering uh, the benefits a lot of times, but then later when you get it, the costs tend to be pretty salient. So, and I'm not just talking about monetary costs. So you bought this like seat cover, right? And you could see the benefits of it, like, oh, this will keep
Yep.
my back seat clean, and then it gets to your house, and now you realize, I've actually got to like clean the back seat first, and then I've got to figure out how it attaches to the car seat, and then I've got to
Sure.
deal with. And do I leave it on then when I have human passengers in the seat, or do I
Yeah,
need to
yeah.
take it back? Like now, the costs to you of
I guess
actually,
it depends how dirty the
that's
human
true.
passengers are, really,
That's
isn't
true.
it?
You hang out with a lot of dirty people, and so then that might be good to just leave it on, right? Um, but the hassle costs of actually using it start to become salient. You realize, like, oh, this is actually something, and so future you realizes you don't actually want to hassle with this, even though past you thought this would
Sure.
be a really good idea. And I think that, like, so one of the things we found in this research is that when you use a wish list or something else, then when you go back to the wish list, you actually focus a lot more on the costs, and it makes you less likely to buy it overall.
So the
Um,
interesting bit then becomes if you're talking about the difference between the future you and the you that you are today, it made me start to think about our favorite topic of segmentation because those two things could be different.
oh, that's a really interesting take on that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what are you segmenting for? And
yeah.
which segment would you get into?
Can you
So
segment for future customers?
if you were marketing animal shows, yeah, or books or whatever it is, then I could be in one segment, which is yes, I would buy them, but the reality is I'd never actually look at them or read them.
Yeah.
But that could appeal to me. But actually, if you gave me a choice, yeah, the instant gratification would be watching something to do with Star Wars rather than David Attenborough in the
I mean,
Antarctic.
it's a great question. So there are certain things where uh, not consuming them later is a problem. So if you've got this subscription service and you're watching the stuff stack up in your freezer, not getting eaten,
Yeah,
that then becomes a difficulty, right? And at some point,
sure,
there's going to be pressure to cancel the service. There are other things, though, where like the non-consumption of them is less of a problem. So I don't know anybody who's big into books who buys a lot of books and then a lot of those books never get read. I don't know a lot of those people who ultimately regret those purchases. They seem to be
sure,
very happy that they're still on their bookshelves and that they have that opportunity. They could go back to it whenever they want to.
sure,
So that would be one distinction I would make is like, is it actually a problem that future customer is different than present customer? For some
sure,
things it will be, for some things it won't be. It'll
sure,
be less of a problem. The other distinction that I would make is like, yeah, if you're relying on the immediacy as a big part of the purchase decision, is there ways of making the immediacy more fun? So are there
sure,
settings in which watching that, because I'm the same way. Like I hardly ever turn on a nature documentary, but like sometimes my wife will put them on for the kids, and if ever I'm walking through the room, I sit down and watch the whole thing because they're fascinating, they're
sure.
really pleasurable,
Yeah,
but it's not something that I seek out. So, are
no,
there ways of kind of reducing that
sure,
initial hurdle in the now that would
sure.
get people into it?
Yeah,
No.
I mean, I guess there are things that you can do to increase the. There are more things it feels that you could do to increase the impulse nature of things, can't you?
Yeah.
By reducing the prices, 2 for 1 offers, even loyalty schemes, that
Yep.
type of thing. I would have thought that you would be able to increase that impulse nature of things using just using the loss aversion, that we're only going to hold it at this price for the next 2 hours or something like that. That makes you buy things quicker, but appealing. And I guess the other side of it would be appealing to the longer view of the person, wouldn't it? And even appealing to even doing. I could see some advertising around. Is your life boring? Do you eat the same breakfast every day? Why not try this? But that then goes back into. I remember the debates that we've had about how you change customers' habits, which
Yeah.
is always one of the most difficult things, isn't it? How
Yeah.
do you
So
knock somebody out of having the same breakfast day in day out, basically?
Yes. So getting people to buy the new breakfast at the grocery store as something they will try in the future for breakfast, that's an easier thing to do
Yeah,
because I'm not eating the breakfast in the grocery store. Especially if it's like, hey, start off your mornings differently, like, over the next month, you could try this instead. Like that, well, yeah, over the next month, I'm sure that I'd be interested in trying that at some point.
sure.
Um, but yeah, like getting people to actually change it the morning of, that
Yes,
requires understanding habits and the ways of changing
yes.
them. And too much to get into in the final moments of this episode, but we can point people to other episodes where we've talked about them.
But I think that does, just quickly, I think that does point to an interesting thing, which is sort of a bit like customer journeys. So there's one thing which is going, so the first thing you got to do is you've got to get the customer to engage and buy it, i.e.,
Yes.
let's just carry on talking about breakfast for the moment. You've, first of all, the problem is getting them to buy it.
Yes.
The second thing to do is getting them to consume it. Okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, what is it you can do along that customer journey to get them to consume it? Is it an adverts on television? Is it that in that promotion you've done, you've gained some type of contact details and you've done something, said something that would jog them to do it? I don't know. It depends on the product or service, I guess.
Yeah, but
But
that's the right approach. Like, can you turn this long term decision into a short term decision? So
yes,
like if I'm watching advertisements in the morning before I'm getting ready for the day, that might trigger like, oh right, I have that new breakfast item that I could try.
yes,
If part of your appeal is, hey, buy this now and like try it tonight when you get home, you'll see then that in the mornings it'll be a great option.
or even if it's some type of redemption voucher
Yeah.
after you've consumed it or something like that, isn't
Or
it?
a
So
short expiration window, right? If you're
yes,
buying something that's going to expire in 2 days, then you
yes,
need to eat it right now, or you're going to have to throw it away, and that can
yes,
incentivize.
yes. Interesting, interesting. But if you could go back and tell your colleagues that calling these things something, a bit more, rather than intertemporal, what was it again?
Intertemporal choice.
Intertemporal choice. That would be handy.
I could go back and tell my colleagues, Colin, but intertemporal choice does not mean time travel, so I can't actually go back and rename it. That's different. That's a different area of study.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we hope that's been of use to you today. And we look forward to talking to you next week, everybody. Thanks very much for listening. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.